So next up, we've got James and Scott from Ivanti. So this is the last presentation that we've got for today. So just a bit of background on both of them. James has been working on computers next end user computing Nexus for 15 years, focusing mainly on securing the user workspace. And Shane has been around since computers were the size of washing machines. He's been part of 3 startups since 1995, 25-year plus career in different areas of cybersecurity, so very well credentialed as well. So the topic that they have is protecting against PowerShell attacks and malicious insiders. So I think we're going to cut straight to them. Thanks, guys.
Welcome, people, to the Ivanti presentation today at good old AusCERT. Today, we're going to be speaking about implementing essential ACSC controls and protecting against PowerShell attacks and malicious insiders. My name's Shane Wescott, Technical Evangelist with Ivanti, and I'm joined by my good buddy, James Lay. Do you want to introduce yourself, Jimmy, and say hello?
Happy to be here. James Lay, a pre-sales security engineer with Ivanti. Looking forward to today's session.
Both of us have got lots of experience with these products, so it's going to be something that you'll get the benefit of that experience. And it should be a good little session for you to learn a bit and see some cool technology.
So to enter the competition to win our Sphero RVR programmable robot, please email gabriellekingston@ivanti.com with the subject Win with Ivanti Security. Yeah, so today we're going to look at 3 common threats that we speak to customers about a lot. We're going to have a look at blocking, controlling, managing macros and the control over PowerShell, because they often come hand in hand. And also looking at malicious insiders within your organization, how we can help to manage some of those threats. And finally, give a little bit of a summary about what we've talked about and some of the next steps that you can take.
Right. All sounds good. All sounds good. I'll let you go through the 3 common threats that we have.
Yeah, so the 3 threats we're going to focus on today is ransomware seems to be getting a huge amount of attention this year. There's been a 150% increase in ransomware attacks in the first half of this year. That came out as part of the OAIC data breach notification report that came out in July. And there's been a number of very high profile attacks on organizations that have been hit multiple times this year. We won't mention any names. I think we probably all know who they are. But data exfiltration has been the #1 extortion, I'd say, of 2020. I saw another ransomware issue this week where just a little bit of data was released on the dark web to say, look, we do have it. We are willing to release it. Time to cough up. But also PowerShell misuse. PowerShell sometimes comes in those ransomware fileless type attacks, but also how you manage PowerShell within your organization and manage the misuse of it, the malicious use of it, the accidental use of it. And then finally, threats do not always come from outside your organization. And I've had lots of interesting conversations with customers over the years talking about the malicious insider and how you manage it. And in lots of ways, it's very difficult, but in some very basic ways, you can do the best you can to protect yourself.
It's interesting on that one that when I did a bit of research before I did some presentations recently, the #1 step to control malicious insiders, we're going to talk about that and show some technology around that. And also just wanted to add in with PowerShell misuse is that the way our industry is working at the moment in IT, you can't really get away with totally blocking PowerShell. You've got to use it for something. It's done for so many things these days, automation, all sorts of stuff, that you've got to work out a way of successfully managing it to make sure it gets used for what it should be used for, but you're minimizing the threats as well. So
safety net.
Absolutely, safety net on there. Yeah. So I just want to go through this just to put a bit of context around where we are and why we're talking about these particular things. If you'll be familiar, I would imagine, with the ASD/ACSC security measures that they recommend. We have a back to basics type approach. We look after the boring stuff, the boring basics, things like app control, patching, restricting admin privileges, those sorts of things. We do all of those. We don't sort of look after backup and multi-factor. The interesting thing is that the ones that we deal with mainly are the tricky ones. So app control, a lot of people find app control, app whitelisting very difficult to implement. We have simple ways of doing that. Things like restricting admin privileges can be quite tricky. Our technology makes that simple. Patching itself of apps and OS, pretty simple stuff at the end of the day, but getting it automated so it takes less load and less manpower is something that we work with quite often. And then where we're talking here today is really about configuring macro settings, because that's a particular area where, you know, blanket security people say, oh, just block it. But, you know, it's virtually impossible to just block it with most organizations these days, because they will have an area there where somebody's going to need to run those sort of macro things. User app hardening, also another thing that needs to be done. Sometimes can be tricky, but again, you've got to look at how you can do that, what sort of flexibility you've got.
That's all about context, right? We're going to talk today a little bit about context. You can hear the word context a few times.
Indeed, you will.
Okay, so let's jump in and have a little look at macros and PowerShell and a link and how we can help you manage both of these. So what I first wanted to start with was a typical attack chain, something we hear a lot about. So you can obviously have phishing campaigns and training users, and that's all very, very important basic controls. But then we start to look at how do we potentially control those macros, what they do, what they launch, and what PowerShell scripts can be run and by whom. And when we look at that, implementing things like application control to control the executable content and the scripts that are running, configuring your macro settings, so only specified macros or signed macros, whatever it might be, are allowed to run, and ensuring you're patching the platform. And again, all three of these items come from those ACSC Essential 8 controls. Nothing smart, nothing clever, basic security. And when we look at, well, how do we stop or control execution of payloads or existing production code, application control. There's the Microsoft Maturity Level 3 recommended blocks. Again, users should never be running those tools. Admins might need to run them for specified uses, but generally shouldn't be running. When we're looking at that execution and privilege escalation, privilege management, controlling what applications are running, and patching code vulnerabilities, all out of the ACSC Essential 8. And you guessed it, blocking the ransomware of the final payload. If we're only allowing approved IT software, then we're going to control against that final delivery. So no EDR here, no threat hunting, no artificial intelligence, just basic cyber hygiene.
Just the boring basics, mate, but it's getting that foundational steps in place. There's always, you know, you hear about people, you know, rule to building a house. You've got to have good foundations. Doesn't matter how pretty the second floor windows are. If you don't have good foundations, the thing will fall down. Same with security, it's multi-layer. Everyone knows security is about layers. So you've got to get that boring basic layer sorted out at the bottom, and then that will cover most of your issues, especially around this subject we're talking now.
An interesting conversation with a customer last week who said one of the real values he got from application control was the reduction in noise on his EDR platform.
Yes.
He can
exactly.
now see a lot less information, a lot less volume to look at exactly what's going on away from application control and basic blocking of non-corporate or IT-approved applications.
Yeah, because you're going to need those platforms anyway. Anyone in a layered security defense in a large organization is going to be using EDR. What we're saying here is use the right tool for the job. And the right tool for this job is those boring basics that come out. And we have, you know, one of the best ways of replicating those out and giving you lots of contextuality and flexibility in how you allow things and how you block things.
Okay, so shifting a little bit across to one of the topics of today's conversation around PowerShell. So the ACSC have an enterprise guide for securing PowerShell and a maturity model that goes along with it. And PowerShell in itself it's not an insecure tool. It's just very widely used and very powerful. And when a threat actor knows that an organization is almost definitely using a tool or an application, then they know there's going to be vulnerabilities or there's going to be misconfiguration, and it's a great thing to attack. That's kind of, you know, Shane, we talk a lot about patching third-party applications. They know there's probably the top 5 that are going to be in your organization and probably unpatched.
Yep. And that's very common. We talk to people about patching all the time. We always come across people who say, yeah, we think we're doing a pretty good job, and they are on the Windows side, but a lot of those vulnerabilities that do get attack vectors through them are all about the third-party products, because people, they take a lot more work and people are less likely to do them at the end of the day.
Yes, look, if you're heavily using PowerShell within your environment, I'm sure many of you are, you've got to look at how you can secure and manage this in the most efficient way to not restrict your admin users and throttle innovation within the business, but do it in a safe way. So these are the 3 levels the ACSC document within this enterprise guide. So level 0 is just a default use of PowerShell. Now the level they recommend is level 1, which is not typical for the ACSC. They typically recommend all organizations should be at level 3, but the documentation says level 1 here. And that just shows that you should be whitelisting what's running, and you should be looking at verifying scripts by the publisher, auditing everything that you're doing, and making sure you're using the latest version of PowerShell. For a level 2, you should be locking PowerShell down to specific users, so any specific users can do it, and making sure that you're hardening some of the WinRM and other features within PowerShell. And finally, for level 3, you should be constraining the use of PowerShell and looking at how privileges are used with PowerShell and who's using PowerShell, and locking it down that way also. So what I want to touch on now is just drop a little bit into how Ivanti can help you to adhere to elements of these maturity levels. We're definitely not going to do everything within this, but give you some of the controls that can help you further mature and get to where you want to be. So level 1, it's all about blocking and ensuring that only approved PowerShell scripts are running. So with our product, out of the box, PowerShell is blocked. And what that means is any PowerShell scripts that are introduced to the environment by the user, that could be accidental, it could be malicious, or it could be targeted, be that via a USB key, a download, them writing the script, coming from a drive-by download, whatever it might be, that's all going to be blocked by default. So that very, very strong position up front. When we start to look at that level 2, we can start looking at how we whitelist the scripts based on specific publishers. So if you are signing your PowerShell scripts, which you can definitely do, and a lot of enterprise organizations are doing these days, then we can start to help you to only approve signed PowerShell scripts to run. And you can see on the screen there are a couple of different ways that we can start to allow these scripts to run. So you can see in the bottom center of the screen, we're approving a script by a file rule, and we're adding in there a vendor check on the file in the metadata to look for my company LLC or whatever your company name is. And you can see a checkbox there for verify certificate at runtime. So we're checking the metadata on the file against the certificate that it's signed with to make sure that file is what we think it is. And again, we can control these PowerShell scripts by file rules. Have you got a folder full of PowerShell scripts? Are they all signed? Do you want to hash the scripts to make sure it's the specified script running from wherever it's running within your environment? And again, whitelisting anything is about balancing the manageability and security of it. You can have the most secure approach or hashed, but it's not very flexible. Or you can have it far more dynamic.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we've both seen over the years with working with this sort of product and these sort of issues is that you need the granular contextuality that allows you to manage things in such a way that you're going to secure the operation to only be done by those people from those locations that need it and when they need it. Whereas most of the time, if people don't have that contextuality or that granularity, their options are lock it all down or open it all up. And in some cases, that's just not going to suit. And then it falls into too hard basket and they leave that vulnerability open.
Yeah, definitely. And you can see it at the top of the screen, talking about that. You know, as I say, we can do things lots and lots of different ways. Here's the option to restrict admins. So by default, we might want to restrict admins to say you can't just go around running PowerShell, but in this scenario, in this context, you can. And we're going to touch on that on the next slide. We start looking at level 3, and we start looking at privilege and controlling. Using that dynamic policy and the context, we can say, for example, if the user is in this OU, and that's the admin's OU, and the computer is in this OU, that's the admin computer's OU, and the device is Windows 10, and the build is greater than 1909, and the day of the week is a weekday between 9 and 5, and the user group is admins, then they can go for it. You know, and you can use any ands and ors, blends of this, scripted rules, who, what, where, why, when. So total control. And it doesn't just need to be, if they fit that, jobs on, go. We can then say, well, for everything you run, and you can see in the bottom center there, we've got PowerShell.exe and PS1 files. You need to give me an audited reason for what you're doing. And that gives people just, do I really want to do this? What am I going to write in that box? And everything they do is then logged. What the machine was, who the user was, what the day was, what the script was, what the hash of the file was, and the reason they gave.
And the thing that also I've seen customers do is this can allow people to have a wider use of PowerShell, but when most people run it, it's actually de-elevated. So it runs PowerShell in a standard sort of context. It's only elevated to full-blown permissions when it absolutely needs to by the certain people that need to do that. And that lets you use a very useful tool, which is PowerShell, but allows you to lessen the likelihood that if it is overtaken and that somebody is taken control of, that it's going to have those admin privileges that let it go and do basically everything.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so with all of that, the bit that everyone's interested in, let's have a look at some live software.
Bit of live software.
Yeah, so we'll jump across now and show you some of these concepts running in one of our labs. Okay, so let's have a look at a demonstration now. So as we saw in the presentation, I've currently got PowerShell script checking enabled by default. And this is set in our Manage tab under Advanced Settings. So we can see PowerShell validation is enabled. So by default, what we're going to see is all PowerShell scripts are blocked. So let's have a look at our target device. And I've got a PowerShell script that I've created for this presentation. And all this does is pops a message to say, hey, what you're running could be malware. So if we try and run this script, what we see is this script file has been blocked. We're presented with that customizable message and the user is protected. Now, what that means is, out of the box, where a user runs a document that has a macro that uses a PowerShell exploit, then what we see is the document opens and the piece of malware or the PowerShell that begins the attack is immediately blocked. So that's fantastic. But there's obviously some PowerShell that we do want running. So let's have a look at exceptions and how we safely allow PowerShell to run under certain contexts. And what we're going to do is, under this security group I've created for only group users in a specific Active Directory group, I'm going to add a rule. I'm going to add a signature item, and I'm going to browse to that script. And there it is. So when I open it, we get the signature hash of the file. So I'm going to add that to my policy, and I'm just going to save and deploy this to the test endpoint. Okay, with the policy now live, if we try and run any PowerShell script, such as the one that's associated with this macro, the PowerShell script is blocked. If we try and run this PowerShell script that we've whitelisted by hash, then the script runs. And there's this could be malware. Okay, so let's go a step further now, and let's look at how we can tailor this down to a specific context. So we'll shift back to configuration. Okay, so we've shown controlling PowerShell through an Active Directory group rule. We've also got what we call custom rules. So a custom rule looks at the context that something's happening. So here I've created an AusCERT PowerShell context rule. And if we look into this, it's checking to see, is the device Windows 10? Is it a remote desktop connection? And is the time before 12:35? And this could be used to make sure that scripts were only run within business hours, for example. But there's a massive choice of conditions that we can use to build out these rules. And you can even use scripted rules as well, something more dynamic. So what we'll do, we'll add our PowerShell rule in here. So we'll just re-add this and make sure we've got the right rule and the right hash. So we just run a rescan there, okay? And we'll deploy that policy out and connect back to the endpoint. Okay, so if we come back to the endpoint now, what we're going to see, if we try and run the script, it's going to continue to run because we are on Windows 10. This is a remote desktop connection, and it is before 12:35, as we can see in the time in the bottom right-hand corner. So if I run this, we can see our PowerShell runs. Okay, and now let's wait till the clock hits 12:35 and see what happens. Okay, so it's now 12:36 and my context has changed. So if we try and run this PowerShell script now, it should be blocked. And there we go, the script is now blocked because the context has changed. So let's look at one more example. Let's see how we can control how macros allow PowerShell to run. So I've got two documents here with macros in. The first one, as we've seen a few times now, launches a malph.ps1 file from the temp directory. And the other one tries to launch this AusCERT PowerShell script. And both get blocked. Okay, what we're going to do now is build what we call a process rule. So this affects what is able to be spawned as a child process from any parent. In this instance, we're going to create an AusCERT PowerShell rule. So I'm going to copy in our script again. There it is. What we're going to do is we're going to say when Word is the parent process, we can define an exact file path, we can do a file name, we can do wildcards, we can use the metadata of the file, we can check the certificate at runtime to make sure that what is running is Microsoft Word. In this instance, we'll just use the path. So when Word.exe launches, it is allowed to run this hashed PowerShell script. Now we're going to save that and deploy it to the endpoint and see what happens. Okay, we're back on the endpoint. First of all, we'll run this WinWord file, and we can see the PowerShell script is blocked. If we now run the AusCERT Word document and the macro launches, we can see our PowerShell is running and our PowerShell script's been allowed to run. So again, here we're showing how we can allow specific PowerShell scripts based on a range of context, who the user is, what the device is, what the time is, what the configuration of the device is. So it's not an on or off. We can be very, very granular in controlling PowerShell. So the last thing I wanted to show on this one was part of our visibility and dashboarding platform. And this really, I guess, shows off a little bit the volume of information that we gather. So this is looking at some of the PowerShell data within our environment that we're capturing. So we have some real-time dashboarding and visibility capabilities that can be used to give you insights into what's happening in your environment. And this PowerShell dashboard is showing us, where, when, who, and what PowerShell has been run. We can see the top users who've been executing PowerShell in the last X days and PowerShell blocks in the last hour. And everything on here can have thresholds applied to them. So we could say if we see, 20 blocks of PowerShell on a device within an hour, then go and raise a security incident that someone can go and investigate and look at. Why is that happening? Is there a malicious insider who's trying to do something? Is there an external attack looking at that machine, trying to execute something? what's happening. So again, it's all about visibility. And lots of the customers I speak to, they love all this information to suck into their SIEM and go and cross-correlate with other sources of information and get more value out of.
Yeah, and I think it's important to have visibility on that. You know, quite often our products, not just our products, but all products, will have details of auditing events socked away somewhere, but making it into a very visible dashboard that's easy for people to change them up a bit, even, you know, schedule an email of that once a week to people so they can have a look at the details from the previous week. That just helps with accountability and management, and you can make sure that you're keeping on track of those things and keeping on top of them. Thanks for that, James. Switch over now to talk a little bit about malicious insiders mitigating the risk. So interestingly enough, I hadn't researched this hugely with the exact words that the guys at the ACSC come out with, but when I did, it was quite interesting to find that when you look at malicious insiders who steal data, if that's the risk you're trying to mitigate, their first #1 thing you need to do is implement control removable storage media and connected devices to mitigate data exfiltration. So that's before you go and do all of the essential 8. Typically, controlling devices and storage media doesn't roll up in the essential 8. If you look at things like the SANS top 20, it comes in around about number 13. I think the CIS in the US has it around about number 8. So it's up there with those very important requirements to get a good security platform happening. But down here with the ACSC, if we're talking about malicious insiders, they say it's the #1 thing. And if you think about that, it is probably the easiest way for malicious insiders to get control of data. So there's a link there to the document that I'm referring to there. You can go and have a look at that if you like. This has been one of the things that I've looked at, which is quite interesting from a USB point of view. You know, people think that, oh, data exfiltration and data leak prevention is all about USB. Well, in some ways it is, only because that part of the market has expanded dramatically, but there are other devices that are much more important than just USBs. Very cool though, there's a few very cool little hackers tools that I like to see. This one is just, looks like a cable. So it's USB Ninja cable, 75 bucks. You loan it to someone, they kick it on. It's got a wireless remote, and in very much the James Bond style, there's a little ring there. When you push the button, it activates the wireless, and you can use that to inject some code when it's passed around. So it looks like a charge cable, but actually a good attack surface. And then this one I thought was pretty cool, Jimmy. This is the OMG cable, which has a built-in Wi-Fi and web server. So basically you download the app, you then connect into your cable, and you then code on your phone, which talks directly to the cable and then goes and injects things into the endpoint that thinks that they're just there charging up their little phone.
It's so awesome stuff. And it all relates back to that social engineering aspect of, I think I've heard it referred to as juice jacking. Everyone is so paranoid about their phone running out of battery and their inability to go on social media that they will use whatever cable they find lying around. They don't care. As long as it gets them online, gets them jacked in, they're going to use it. And yeah, if you're that threat actor going around looking at people to target, then this is still a great way to do it.
And then that gives a lot of ability to do a lot of things. So at Ivanti, we are lucky to have a product called Ivanti Device Control as part of our portfolio. And this is used by a lot of the, as I call them, super secret squirrel organizations around the world to protect their devices and protect their data from exfiltration. Centrally managed. Largest site we have in this country is somewhere around 300,000 devices, quite large. It will centralize well and be able to manage a very large number of users. Role-based access control for different functions in there, so quite flexible architecture. Pretty good product at the end of the day, and will do more than just your basic sort of USB control. I often talk with customers about this, and I'll just say, look, if you just want to block USBs, you're probably talking to the wrong people, because this is the Rolls-Royce of device control. It's not I want to block USBs or not block USBs. There's a million ways you can do that, and people probably own 2 or 3 products already that include that sort of functionality. This is designed for those people who have specific use cases around things like data copy restrictions, so that you can block certain types of documents being copied onto USBs, enforce encryption, those sorts of things, take shadow copies of everything that goes out the door, even and up to and including doing shadow copies of every device that's printed. We had a customer the other week we were talking to who has now got all of their agents working from home, like a lot of organizations. One of the things they wanted to track was they wanted to track how are we going to make sure we know what they're printing out on their home printer in their house.
I love that use case.
Yeah, and if that's hooked up to the corporate PC that they're using, hey, we want to make sure that if they're printing stuff out of our applications, we want to find out what they're printing. So we can centralize that, and I showed them a bit of a demo of doing that. I set it up myself in my house. I've got a little printer next to me, so I did a couple of prints, and then I showed them the data that we can pick up from that, the header of the file, who printed it, where they printed, name of the file, what was it containing, and even you can take a copy of the actual print output to the printer, and you can then store that centrally, and someone could go in and say, okay, exactly what is written in this file that they printed out. So very, very granular control there, but it's something that is something we've been doing for quite a long years, and one of our big selling products down here. It solves a lot of problems for people.
I got a customer who I was dealing with who they just wanted it due to the granularity of information that it captured, so that they could use it as a post-incident tool to identify how did this data get out, where did it get out from, what happened. They didn't even want to control devices. They just wanted to have the visibility into how data was flowing.
Yeah, and auditing wise, it's very, very good at that as well. You could just leave it in audit mode and you'll get very granular things. I mean, I ran that on my laptop 24/7 on my little work laptop. And I remember the first time I set it up, I tried to do some printing. About an hour later, I'd set it up, did a bit of testing with USBs. Yeah, it's working really good. Awesome. Went to do some printing, couldn't print. And it took me a while to work out, oh, actually, I forgot to allow my endpoint to do printing anymore, because it can stop any printer, or you could actually individual printing. You could say from this particular endpoint or this particular user group, you can only print to that printer over there. You can't print to the other ones.
And if you look at where we find ourselves with COVID and with so many users working from home now, you know, people are more isolated. People are working in what could be a strange environment for many. And, you know, is there that temptation there to just copy some data off? You know, might need this in my next job, might be of interest to have this. Things that they probably wouldn't do if they were still working in the office. But it feels like there's no one watching you when you're at home. It feels like a very different space.
Yeah, you could imagine that people could think they could get away with that, and then becomes a bit of a danger to the organisations.
And malicious comes in all kind of different forms, right? It's not just people stealing data and deleting things. It can be more surreptitious than that.
Yes. Okay. One of the other fun bits we love is looking at live software, and I've got just a photo here of my good mate Nigel from Slocky Horror, the skeleton there. He is in that photo. I'm not sure who the old guy is, but anyway.
That's me, before I went bald.
That's you. There could be a future photo of you.
I think I'll get my hair back, Shane.
Maybe it's me. Anyway, let's dive into some live software and go and have a look at how device control actually works. Now, I've got a little picture here, which I'll show you, is of the keys I'm going to use for this demonstration, just USB keys. The blue one is allowed to run pretty much holus bolus, doesn't really matter, because of the brand of key it is. The red one has some special settings on it, and I'll show you those. And then the other ones are just two random keys that I picked up. So let me first show you my blue key. And we'll just get it in there. There we go. And what you can see with the blue key is it'll come up, and I can double click just like any normal USB key, and away I go. I can use that particular key. Let's grab my random key that I found lying around somewhere. And you can see that comes up as USB key, but it's totally inaccessible. I can't do anything with that key because it's not specifically called out. It's just a random key I picked up somewhere. Let's have a look at our red key, which is the one that's got all the smart stuff on it. So eventually, a couple of seconds, it'll come up with password. So I put the password in, And once I put the password in, because this encrypted key, it's now going to be unlocked. I can go in and have a look. It's currently empty. Now, I've also got some rules on this key. If I try and drag and drop a Word document onto this key, you'll see it comes up and says, hey, you need admin privileges. I can put those in, but even though I put those in, it's still not going to work. Okay, so I've basically said you're not allowed to copy Word documents onto this key. You can drag and drop this Acrobat one here, and what that will do is that will just work. Now, I've got another document here, also an Acrobat document. When I drop this one on, I get into the same loop as the administrative permissions, because if I show you that file, it has the word secret in it. Okay, and I've set up a policy here for DLP to say you are not allowed to copy any file that has the word secret in it. So a lot of our customers will do things like this for DLP. Let me show you a little bit of the Device Explorer and show you how that was configured. Under removable storage devices, I've got some overriding rules up here that say everyone's disabled. That's a low priority rule, so it can be overridden by high priority rules like these ones here. And what I've said is for everyone who's using one of these type of keys, it's got to be encrypted. I've got a filter set, so you can only do Acrobat, and I've got a DLP filter for Acrobat. If I show you that just quickly up here, you'll see that my DLP filter says contains secret. So if there's the word secret in an Acrobat document, it's going to get blocked. And then this one here, this special key, this is actually my blue key saying it's got free read and write and doesn't have to be encrypted. So a couple of cool things there. I've also, in this example, put on our shadowing option for our printers. If I go to our Log Explorer, I can show you a couple of things. Denied users, so you can see this is an ISO I was trying to access. I'd forgotten to turn on access for DVDs. You can look at things like everything today, and you've got a stack of things there. You've got live streaming, you've got printing that's been done, you've got all sorts of things turning on and off. If I go to shadow user per month and do a query on that, you'll see that shows me my file that I printed earlier today, or when this log file was. So it tells you the computer, the name of the file, the name of the printer, all sorts of things. You can even get a copy of that file so you can go and have a look and see exactly what it is that the user was trying to print off. So let's move on now and just summarize what we've been talking about. And I'll let James take us through a couple of these, and we'll just talk about sort of next steps and things.
Yeah, so I suppose just to map back to those three key threats that we talked about at the start of the session. The first one was around ransomware and PowerShell and macros. So again, measure yourself against the latest ACSC Essential 8 and PowerShell maturity levels and see where are you today, where do you want to be, and what is going to help you move along that journey. Some of it might be process, some of it might be technology. What do you need to move along? And look at your malicious inside threat level. Has that changed as COVID's occurred? Has that changed due to other factors? Is that something that you just never really analyzed before, or analyzed potentially in the realms of data? And finally, we would love you to come to the Ivanti booth and have a chat with us about some of our experiences in all of the things that we've talked about today.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we love doing, is listening to customers tell us about their challenges, and we can relate some of the stories from the customers that we've been working with as well. From myself and James, between the two of us, we've probably got 25 years or so experience with some of these security products between us. So it's been a long road of talking to lots and lots of customers and getting lots and lots of ideas around use cases. One of the great things about having products that have been in the market for a long time helping customers is you do get a lot of great features that customers suggest that get into the product. So when we go and talk to most customers, we're pretty confident that we're going to have some ability to configure it to meet the context that they're actually after. So it's been a great pleasure to be able to share with you guys. James, well done on the demo and stuff, and some good points you've made in there. We'll spend some time on the booth and see if we get some nice people coming in and talking to us.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time, and I'm sure everyone will have a great conference.
Okay, thanks very much for the team at Ivanti for providing us with that and spending some time to answer the questions that have come out of it. So we're about to wrap up for the day. We've got another keynote at 2:45 today, which you guys can attend, but otherwise have a good afternoon, and we'll see you all again tomorrow. Cheers.